probably, I don't know where it's going to go. But we've got 6 distinguished old Jeffery ancestors with us today. And I'll introduce them to you in just a minute. But in order for this to work, you gotta play like that it's 1816. You can play like it's 1860 or it's 1840. You pick a year that you feel comfortable playing like it's that year. But you got to go back in time, because these people are going to portray Jeffery descendants back, and they're of different generations too. But you'll meet them, and if you listen closely to them, you probably will learn some things that maybe you didn't know. So I don't want them to miss any of the rest of the program, so I'll introduce them to you right now. Jefhoiada. I'd like to introduce Jefhoiada Jeffery. Jefhoiada is the founder of Mount Olive.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen.
You're not here to make a speech, Jefhoiada. You're here to sit down and answer questions. I'm sorry, Jefhoiada. You go ahead.
Oh, no.
Well, look, he can do what he wants to do. He founded this place.
Yes.
He's the founder of Mount Olive.
Yes.
Founder of this church.
Go ahead.
And I reckon, well, he's still a little bossy about it. But Jefhoiada, you can have a seat or say whatever you want to say.
Oh, boy.
I'd like to present Lucretia Jeffery. Tell us who your parents were. Do you remember?
My dad is Jeffery Jeffery, and my mom is Mary Ware.
Okay. She married into the Harris family there. You wanted to have a seat over there by your father?
By my dad?
Yeah. Dad. Oh,
Their daughter.
This
Haven't seen you in a long
Young
time.
Jesse Jeffery. Young Jesse is Jefhoiada's youngest brother.
He's a good boy.
Sister Lucretia. Old Jesse. Wait a minute. I want to say to you. I want to say to you.
Uncle Jesse.
Oh, 5.
Ready? You stay here. Let me present to you Indiana Jeffery. Indiana Hayes Bishop Jeffery. She was married to Ambrose, and she has some very interesting things that she can tell us about the Civil War during the time that she grew up. So just have a seat over there by young Jesse and watch him.
I do have a reputation.
Okay, open it up. Now, we're bringing both of these out together because this is James Mason Jeffery. This is Old Jesse Jeffery. Now, these two people probably are the most, I don't know how to put it, very colorful personalities in Arkansas. They almost stand head and shoulders above the rest of the Jeffreys as far as their personality and their fame is concerned. Although Jefhoiada, we all know him, we take him for granted. But Old Jesse and James Mason are people who really influenced the Jeffery family. I would say, to our credit, Old Jesse didn't wield too much influence, fortunately, because he pretty much of a rascal. But anytime you find books in your house or you find culture around you, you can trace it back to Jane Mason. She was the original Jeffery, married James Jeffrey, and she was quite interested in education. And from her spirit, her drive, the Jeffery family became educated through her push and her teaching a lot of those people too. She came from an old family in Virginia. She'll tell you about it. We're not quite sure where she came from, really. I mean, we know where she came from, but it's still quite a mystery.
Woman of mystery.
It's quite a mystery. Are y'all comfortable there?
You walk down here where this fan's at.
Well,
I didn't, you know, I'm too dressed for the
This
fan.
doesn't last too long.
we're going to kind of reverse our schedule. Here's what we're going to do this afternoon. We're going to have a panel, and then we're going to have a memorial service for Jeffery Jeffery and Isaac Jeffery, sons of Elijah, who were killed during the Civil War. And then following this, all of you are invited to a reception for the panel given by my gracious sister from Oklahoma City, Merle King. She's bought all the soda pop, and I saw some booze up there too, at the A.C. Jeffery house. So be pleased for everybody to come after we're through here today. But first of all, I'd like to tell you a couple of stories. You like stories? Have you ever heard of Bulger Jeffery? Bulger? He's in all the genealogies and histories. You know how Bulger got his name? Let me tell you. It was right here in this church. Bulger's family, the family dog was named Bulger. And to tell you the truth, I don't even remember what Bulger's real name was, but everybody just called him Bulger. But they were having church service one morning, and they were singing this hymn, and Bulger didn't know the words to it. So he was all reared back like he was singing this hymn, and he was saying, "Here, Bulger, here, Bulger." And suddenly the hymn ended, but he wasn't quite ready to stop, and he just kept going, "Here, Bulger," one time real good. And of course, naturally, from that day on, he was known as Bulger. So if you run across him in Jeffery history, he's got his name right here. Some people have asked me about the Hankses. My name is Hanks, but I'm more Jeffery than I am Hanks, and I'm not sure that that's a good idea or not. But anyway, my father's mother was a Jeffery, and my mother's father was a Jeffery, which makes my brother and my sister and I
Makes you inbred.
half Jeffery. And but you know, sometimes when cousins get married, you get all kinds of peculiar personalities that come out of that, and as well as levels of intelligence. But the way that happened, and here's another little story I'll tell you, then we'll get to the travel. We had a great-grandfather named William Hanks who lived in Alabama, near Montgomery. And they were there for many, many years, and then they moved to Shreveport, Louisiana. And during the Civil War, William Hanks had a dairy farm, had a dairy herd, a lot of cattle. And when the Civil War came to Louisiana, he lost all his cattle, both to the Confederate Army and to the Union Army. because armies lived off the land in those days, and they didn't care whose cow it was. So both armies helped themselves to his dairy herd, and he ended up with nothing. So he moved to Harrison, Arkansas, and tried to start again. He married. He was married the first time, and he had 3 sons from a previous marriage. And then he married a second time up in Harrison. And this woman he married she had 3 sons too. And he died in 1870 over in Harrison. And it was hard times. It was right after the Civil War. And so she told the older Hanks boys they had to leave. She couldn't support them. There were 3 of them. Millard Hanks was the oldest. He was about 15. Lewis was the youngest, was about 11. And Roland, our grandfather, was in the middle. He was maybe 13 or so. And so they left. She just kicked them out. Evil stepmother. Bad as you see in the movies. And they followed, is it Crooked Creek? Out of Harrison Creek. Crooked Creek. They were following Crooked Creek east, and they don't know, nobody knows why. They just, the direction they head off. And their sole possession, Millard, the oldest, had a knife, had a pocket knife. And their first night out, they ran across this farm family, and they offered to trade the knife to the woman for some cornbread and buttermilk. And she said, no, I'll just give you some cornbread and buttermilk, you keep your knife. And she let them sleep on the porch. And that's how they made their way. I went over and they were getting close to Mountain Home. And they were on an Indian trail, and it was a Sunday morning. And here came a circuit rider preacher along the trail, along the Indian trail. He was on his way to Mountain Home for a preacher. His name was Philip Jeffery, Philip Mason Jeffery. And he saw these 3 ragamuffins there wandering around on that trail. So he wrote a note to his wife and gave the boys a map and told them how to get to Mount Olive. And so, he told his wife, he said, take these guys in and just let them stay there until I get back from my preaching circuit. And we'll try to find some jobs for them on the farm. Well, the only people lived here at the time were the Jeffreys. So they farmed these boys out to different Jeffrey families. And they grew up here, and all 3 of them married Jeffrey girls. And then that started the mixture of Hanks Jeffrey. And that's how we came to be. But through the good graces and the compassion of Philip Mason Jeffery, the Hankses would never have been in Mount Olive to begin with. So that was a good thing that the man did. Gave us all an opportunity to be here today. About a quarter of a mile behind you, close to the railroad tracks, was where Elijah Jeffery had, it was, some people called it the old hotel, but it was a large house, and he did take in boarders from time to time. Train would stop there. He had one of the first liquor licenses in Israel County. His 2 oldest sons were Jefhoiada Quincy Jr. and Isaac. Isaac was the oldest. Jefhoiada Quincy was the second one. His wife at the time, whose name was Massey Caroline Robertson. And later she died, and there are other family members, but the ones that we're interested in today for the memorial service is Isaac and Jeffery Quincy. But they live, part of the old house is still there if you can find it. It's all grown up. It's right next to the railroad tracks. There may be a few stones
Chimney
left
is
around.
still there.
Anybody know how to, you know where it is?
No, we were there just there. It was
Where
all
you were?
west of the chimney.
Okay. We'll get back to that later. Let's move on to our distinguished panel here. Jefhoiada, what's that hanging down there? What do you got there? What in the world is that?
This?
Yeah.
Well, there's a story there. It sort of started back, they called it the War of 1812. England is push and shove with us about something about Canada. Anyway, the government offered $24 and 160 acres of land if you join up. So that sounded pretty good to me. And so I joined, and I was in a few battles, and there was one battle in particular that I remember quite well. It was the battle of, they call it the battle of Sinkhole. Now, you got to remember, that was a long time ago. And, I'm 222 years old, so something about that.
Looking pretty good.
But the best I remember, that we had these Indians cornered, and there was some British troops there too. But it was so thick and everything, you couldn't use rifles. It was hand-to-hand combat. And I engaged this Indian, and it was either him or me, and I thought it'd be better if it was him. So I'm not proud of it, but I killed him. And I thought, well, if that's the way they are, I'm just going to take his scalp as a warning to the rest of them that I'm a peace-loving fellow, but I'm not going to put up with that kind of stuff. I carry this with me all the time.
So the Indians kind of shied away from you.
Well, yes, I think they did. They're more respectful of.
I can understand that. Lucretia, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I married Andrew Harris into the Harris family. And I lived with the Harrises. They were pretty well off. And I lost poor Andrew. And I remained alone for a little while until I decided to marry. I wasn't quite sure, but he was awfully nice to me. T.J. Howell. And this was about 1882. So anyway, I had my little Drew with me, named after his daddy. I'd been alone for a while since I lost my Andrew. And little Drew was 14. So he went to the wedding of his mama at the church with his new mama's husband. I let him know that T.J. Howell is not Drew's daddy. He's going to be my husband. So he was nice, and we went to the church and got married. And dang, if things didn't change when we left. We got out of that church, we're driving home in the wagon, and T.J. Howell decided that my little Drew, son of Andrew Harris, needed a whooping. And I couldn't believe it, because this wasn't the man I married. Now he's turning into someone else. So I stopped the wagon. And I got out, and I said, "Oh, my dead body, are you going to give my son a whooping?" And then I gave him that famous left hook and white jab. And left him there, first sitting, lying on the road. And little Drew and I got in the wagon, and we left him there, and we drove on, and that was that.
How long long did that marriage last?
About an hour.
To be very spunky.
I take after my daddy.
There you go.
Well, now I have something to add here.
Go ahead.
Lucretia
Jay.
hasn't said the most important thing about her. She took after me. She midwifed, she doctored, and almost all of the people in our family died in her house.
These stories,
Including me.
these folks have done a lot of research on who they're portraying, so you can take this to the bank.
That house still stands today, and people are still living and dying in it. It's true.
Young Jesse, you've been famous in the Jeffery family ever since the Jeffreys have been around. You're Jefhoiada's younger brother, is that right?
That's correct.
You got in some trouble back when you were maybe 16, 17, 18, longer than there, or 18?
22.
A little older than that. I was born in 1804, and in 1825, I got into a bit of a scrap. Actually, it was an argument, I think, that had been going for a while. There was a fella named William Henderson that moved from east, I think, Virginia.
Come here with Daniel Boone.
Anyway, word was that he was a bit of an unsavory character. Didn't make any judgments on him until he claimed some land that Dad owned at the time. When he laid claim to that land, it kind of put him at cross purposes with our family. And so there was a bit of an argument over that for some time. A little later, a deputy sheriff, who was a friend of Dad's, came by and enlisted Dad's help, along with my brother Daniel and myself, to go and arrest this Henderson character. He had a writ for him at the time. So, although reluctant, I did agree to go along. Upon reaching the Henderson home, we were met by Henderson and a rifle. And he told us that if we crossed his yard fence, he would blow it up for us. That did not seem to deter Dad too much. And he went through the fence, and tempers flared a bit, and ended up with Henderson attempting to point his rifle at him, at which point I asked for the gun that my brother Daniel was carrying, received that gun, and got in the clear and put an end to Mr. Henderson.
You mean you shot him?
I did.
And over time, that story has changed and changed. But I was so thankful when he come out, a little rock out of that hearing, and there come young Jess. I just fell to the ground, thanking the Lord that they had saved him. Because that argument went all the way back to Kentucky when Judge Richardson, he thought he was going to own all of Ohio and Kentucky, including our land. He owned everything. It's called the Transylvania Land Company. That William Henderson was his boy, and he had been my husband's boss. And they had been contemporaries with each other all the way through. In fact, that's part of the reason we left Loudon, Tennessee, and moved on into Kentucky and on over here, was to get away from them Hendersons. And then he shows up with a land grant from the government saying that was his land. We had been here longer.
confused here. We got Young Jesse and Old Jesse.
That's my brother-in-law.
Okay.
That's his nephew. That's my son.
Well, let me tell you.
That's my son.
Clear that up.
This is my son, and this is my son. These are my granddaughters. This is my granddaughter-in-law. She was married to Ambrose.
Mama, let me talk to you.
Just because I ain't living with your father no more, don't mean you can tell me what to do either.
I realized I didn't get to talk. I want to talk to him now. Please, Mama. Well, it was a bad situation there. I'm for law and order. And my Uncle Jess, he kind of take the law into his hand, you know.
What you going to take up for yourself?
He got up these fellers and went down to Little Rock and was going to
Your this thing never started if you let me have my way. Young Jesse been long gone.
He ended out Jeffery's Daddy.
Yeah, I know what you was going to do if they didn't go your way. You was going to spring him out and bring him back home.
Well, then just what did you do to Ambrose Severe?
That's against the law. So I got together the best lawyers I could find around, and we went down there to Little Rock and convinced the jury that he's innocent. So we got him acquitted within the law. See, us Jeffries want to be law-abiding, good citizens.
Well, I tell you, you can have your jury trial and have all you want. If I don't like the outcome, ain't no kin of mine gonna go to prisoner hang.
You might have been following the law, but he was there to assure that his namesake was coming home.
We had to, I know it was a wild frontier then, but we had to establish some kind of law and order here.
But
But behind every great man is a greater woman, and probably your shotgun.
Well, had a good end.
Indiana has a personal story that goes beyond the history that relates to her marriage to Ambrose. Would you tell us a little bit about what happened?
Yes, and first I want to tell you that according to the Bible, it says that man is appointed once to die and then the judgment. So I don't, my aunt sent me a picture of Ambrose in India, and I looked at the picture of Ambrose and I was fine, and I raised up the picture of India. And you know how you feel when you walk beside a mirror or look in a mirror. You see yourself and you know that's you. And you know you don't think anything about it. And that's the way I felt when I looked at this picture. And inside I started just violently shaking like this. And I looked and I wasn't shaking outside. And I thought, well, that's strange. So I put the picture down, sat there a minute, and I raised it again, and the same thing happened again. My insides just started shaking. And it, you know, alarmed me a little bit, and I put the picture down and sat there, and I thought, now, old girl, you're going to look at that picture, and you're not going to shake. So I did. I picked it up and looked at it, and it was like you would pick up any other picture and look at it. She does look a little bit like me through the forehead and eyes especially. But I don't believe that I lived another time and was India. I have a theory. I'm going to tell you my theory. I believe that memories from our ancestors of places they've been, things they've done, people they've met, things they've said are passed down to us through our DNA. And I believe there's things in our life that maybe triggers these memories. And when I looked at that picture of India, it triggered a memory of who she was in my life. So that's all. That's my only explanation.
How did you and that, oh, excuse me, go ahead.
India, are you pretending like you're one of your descendants? Named Elvada?
Well, I am one of her descendants. I am.
Didn't you rob your own headstone and take it to another cemetery?
Don't tell me.
How did you meet Ambrose?
Well,
I think you were kind of second choice, weren't you?
yes, I was. He had been married before, but no, I had been married before. Sorry. To William Bishop. Yeah, you know what age does too. I had been married before to William Bishop, and I had 2 children, a boy and a girl. And he had died on his way back from the Civil War. Got real close to home, but he had died. And I was alone raising these 2 children. And people at the church had wanted to get me and Ambrose Jeffery together. And we were neither one just interested at all. Ambrose had a former love. He fell in love with Mary Mason out in Loudon, Tennessee during the time of the Civil War. He was injured. He had gotten shot in the knee, and Thomas Jefferson Mason got him. And actually, Mary took him to, her father was Thomas Jefferson, to help him recover. And while he was there,
A little bit like Jesse James and Zarel,
while he was there, they would spend a lot of, Mary and him would spend a lot of time together, and he fell madly in love with her. But he didn't want to tell her. So he came back to Mount Olive and wrote her a letter and told her of his love for her, and that he would be honored if she would be his wife. And she had already married Andrew Fresno. So he was heartbroken. I was heartbroken because I had lost my husband at death. He had lost his love to another one. And the people at church wanted to get us together. And we didn't either one really want any part of getting back into anything. One day, I had killed a hog, and I was trying to butcher that hog with 2 little children there. And Ambrose rode by on his horse, and he stopped to help me. And during the talk and the help, we decided, we kind of liked each other. So as time went on, we married, and we had 12 children. It was the love of my life. He, like I said, had been in the Civil War. He was a farmer. He was also a lawyer. Him and his brother Asa had a mercantile store, general store at Silmore, and then they had another one upriver. At Optimus. He was never real successful. At that time, people didn't have any money. And if they did have paper money, it was worthless. And they paid with chickens or hogs or eggs or whatever. So, we had a hard time. And then before I died, we talked a lot, and I told him, when I die, I would like for you to put daffodils on my grave and come and maybe play the flute for me, because I always loved to hear him play the flute. And he did. He had to write to our daughter in Texas and borrow $13 pay for my funeral dress and my coffin. But he would come every day and visit with me. And he put daffodils around my sweeping place, and he played the flute for me.
Is it true that he died on your birthday?
Yes, he did.
Where are y'all buried?
We are buried at the McMurtry Foster Cemetery in Mountain View. And
So why is your headstone over in his account?
well, my granddaughter, you never know what that one's going to do. But
That'd be Elvada.
no, yes. Back a few 6 or 7 years ago, a headstone was found on the corner of Oak and Woody in Mountain View. And it was about so far under the ground, was in a road ditch. And it was mine. And my granddaughter and her cousins and her mother came along, and they really didn't know what to do with it. So they loaded it up in the pickup truck, which they have these days, not in my day, but they have these days. And we took it up to the Hilltop Cemetery in Mount Olive and set it in a concrete form with the intentions of, when they found my grave, they were going to take it back. And they have found my grave, and they're going to take it back, and they're going to get a stone for Ambrose or build one. I have a cousin that would like to build one, and I'll be awfully proud for him to do that.
How many kids you say you had?
I had 12. Don't ask me their names.
Young Jess, let me ask you, how many kids you had?
Well, I'm attributed to 21.
Did you know all of them personally?
I can't remember. The Jeffery family book has named 14.
14.
14. And I'm not sure about the other third.
There wasn't no TV in those days?
There was not. No TV.
Any mulattoes?
No.
Of course not.
This brings us to, I would say, the mystery woman of the Ozarks, the queen of the White River Valley, Jane Mason. She married James Mason, James Jeffery, but despite that, I think she's better known as just plain Jane Mason, because she and her husband had a falling out. Well, she can tell you about that. But I would like to find out, and I've heard a lot of stories about your origin. A lot of different stories. People say that you're from this Mason family and that Mason family and so on. I get dizzy trying to figure out all the Mason families that you've been accused of belonging to. Could you clear that up for
That's
us?
an accusation that's well founded. I am a Mason and I'm proud of it, but you know what? They're not real proud of me for marrying that James Jeffery. So that's probably all that needs to be said on the subject.
Yeah.
I could read, I could write, I married an illiterate laborer, and you know what? Love of the heart don't dictate everything, but it did in my case. I followed that man everywhere. But we followed our son. We followed Jefhoiada here. He moved here, he got that that homestead and here and with that land, and so we followed him here. He got here first. He got here in September of 1816, and we got here a little bit after that.
Mama's right about that. Yeah.
I'm right about everything. You just don't know when to hush.
The reason that I decided to settle here, well, of course, I had the $24 and 160 acres to get. But one thing, I didn't know how I was going to get across the river. And the other side was Indians anyway. And I'll tell you, very little difference. Very little difference. I tell you, Very little difference, Dale, between this area here and North Carolina.
Yep, looks like home. Looks like home. Well, you know, we got here, and he's right. The Indians were on the other side of the river. The Indians, in fact, had a reservation on the other side of the river from 1817 to 1828. And any white people that was over there before that time, which there wasn't but a couple, they had to come back across the river because on this side of the river was white people and on that side of the river was Indians. And the only way you could be on the other side of that river was if you was married to an Indian, if you were part Indian, or you had established trade with them. Well, now leave it to my Jefhoiada. He established trade with everybody. He even got in with Jacob Wolf. I mean, there named his child Quincy.
I might say I'm somewhat a humble person. I didn't want to really tell about everything I've done. But you know, you brought it up, Mama. I was an engineer. I helped lay out a lot of this land out here. So much I don't even remember all that.
Engineer, surveyor, land squatter, him and Sam Houston and John Houston. Let me tell you, you talk about some hoodlums. They got over there in Oklahoma on the Grand Saline, and they had the salt works with old Robert Bean from down in Batesville. You talk about hoodlums. I was worried on a daily basis they was going to jail.
I don't remember that. But I was one of the first legislators to Little Rock. Was a judge. I was a peaceable fellow trying to bring law and order to this land. And it wasn't easy. And this Wolf feller up here north, he was always antagonizing me about politics and stuff.
You talking about Jacob Wolf?
Yeah.
Well, I just never quite got the story right. When you led old Chief Silamo and Big Charlie off, and you caused that whole war down there on the creek when they killed Chief Silamo. I still don't understand that. But I think we probably better let Jess do some talking before I just take over everything. He's got my back.
I would like to ask old Jesse. I have seen myself in old records from Davidsonville, which no longer exists, but the records are in an old courthouse near Walnut Ridge, Arkansas, called Powhatan. And there are stacks and stacks and stacks of records in there where you're have been charged with assault and battery. You shot people. People have shot you. Or are you just mean or what?
Well, I'm a private person. If they want to cross with me, I'll cross with them. I take no help from no man. You give me trouble, I'll give you trouble.
For every politician, there's an enforcer.
The thing that always confused me, your brother said that your body was just riddled with knife scars and bullet wounds. Was it really that bad?
Well, there's a few, but there was probably more given than taken. Like I said, you give me a nice car, I'll give you a bullet.
Well, your brother James, I don't think he liked you at all, did he? And he talked about you something.
Well, now you're getting into family problems. Me and my family and my kin is kin. You can argue with kin. Don't let somebody else argue with my kin. I can argue with my kin.
Well, this man helped me get across that river on a number of occasions to take care of different things, and defied his brother on more than one occasion. And you know, it does. It takes two sorts of people, and when you've got a politician, they've got to keep the hands clean, or at least the appearance of it. So Jazz here, he did what needed to be done, and Jefhoiada over here, he, you know.
Well,
Well, you know, despite his rowdy ways, a lot of people thought highly of you. I've read different places where you were appointed to important positions, road commissioner, and so you had a pretty good reputation as a decent man, but you just fought. You like to fight. Is that your problem?
If you're gonna do a job, you might stumble here and there in doing this job. And I consider that more of a stumble, a little trip here and there. And, you know, you bump heads with people. You know, you bump your head, you get mad on you.
Elvada? Oh, excuse me.
And
Sorry, Indiana.
this,
You have a relative with you, Caroline.
Yes, I do.
You
Came
introduce
here
her.
by surprise today.
we were gonna surprise our dad. His
Oh.
granddaughter-in-law is here.
For a couple of 100 years.
She has come a long way. Caroline.
You
Stand
stand
up,
up.
Charles.
And Caroline.
And guess Isaac's widow. Granddaughter, sorry. Get you that. Daughter.
That's everything. You don't know her name.
Well, you know, talking about getting right, we're sitting here and we're talking about all of us, you know, a lot of other children. James, he lived in a little community that was known as Crestwell, but he actually lived this direction, a little closer to what became Athens, which I had a hand in. And James built him a gorgeous house, just a gorgeous house. And it was white. He was one of the first people around here to be able to get paint and paint his house. It was called the White House. Well, as people started dying, they just, you know, buried him right there in the yard. And today, the Izard County Cemetery book doesn't even list that cemetery. They don't even know there's a cemetery there. Well,
But it's going to.
but we're, you know, I've got descendants that know their business. And Elvada and her friend Freda and Denny Elrod and Sue McCluskey, they got to looking for my granddaughter Amarilla. All because that Freda woman was looking for Jesse James. I'm glad I died before the Civil War. Well, they got to looking for Amarilla and they couldn't find where she was buried, couldn't find nothing. It said Izard County. They went through the Izard County books. They went through everything. Well, this woman gets this Elvada, she gets the creeps on a regular basis. But it turns out to be something, let me tell you, because they trespassed. They climbed that fence, they went out on this woman's field, and they got to witching the graves, and they were digging and looking and digging and looking, and for the 30-something graves that were there, they found one headstone. They found my granddaughter Avarilla's. And I'm so proud of Elvada for doing that.
Where was this?
It's at the White House Cemetery, which they're going to get put back up. And it was right where my son James had his house built on a little farm right on the creek. And there's about 30 souls buried there, and it's all trickled down to cows now. But you know, my son James had money and land too. And that's a nice little area there. But now Amarilla, she married William Oso Dillard, and he Osby. Loso worked just fine for me. Anyway, he fought in the Civil War, and he was at Pea Ridge, and them Union boys, they captured old General Shelby, and probably y'all people know who that is. You know, I passed on, but you know, you keep an eye out. You know what's going on out there. Well, they captured old General Shelby, and I'll be dang if old William Osby, you know, they all gathered So Frank James and William and Cable Kennard and Bill Chitwood, they just jumped on their horses and they went over there and got General Shelby back. And so they made friends. And you know, when you make friends in the time of war, you pretty much don't forget them. So Jesse James and them, that's the little brother of Frank. He wasn't there at Big Ridge. But later, he come down and he went to the funeral of Amarillo, him and his brother Frank, because his aunt and uncle just lived around the bend, which was his wife's grandparents. It was his aunt and uncle. That's what I mean about them Hankses and Jeffries. But the way that they figured all this out was, you all have been married into the Landers too. Well, Elijah Landers, he married Martha Hinkle, who was the sister of William Hinkle, who was a friend of these guys as well. And so they had went to the wedding of Gilden Landers and Elijah Gilden Landers and Martha Hinkle. And it was there that they found out about the Flannery stable over at Optimus. So they went over to visit Mr. Flannery, Old Jesse and Frank. And at the Flannery stable, Mr. Flannery told them that Amarillo had died. And that was the wife of their friend Bill. William Oso Dillon.
Okay.
Osby.
Well, that's interesting. We don't want to keep these folks too long. Maybe there'll be questions from the audience to any of these bona fide old Jeffries.
Young Jesse, you're my great-great-great-grandfather. I heard that maybe you were buried up around Jumbo. You know anything?
I really can't tell you where I'm buried because I was dead.
Any more questions? You'll get a straight answer. Well, let me tell you, y'all, anything you want to add to what you've already said?
Where is this White House, John? Cemetery.
There's no cemetery there.
But I mean, where is this place you're talking about?
When you go on the old road from Calico Rock down, it's Boswell Road. You go down Boswell Road, you go under the train trestle twice. And after you go through it the second time, on the right-hand side, there's a big field there bordering the creek, and it's in that field. And that was my son James's land. And that's where he built his safe up from the flooding river and the flooding creek. And he had a big farm there, and as people died, that's where they buried them, and that's where my Amarillo is buried.
Is there anything left of the place, rocks or anything, foundation?
The house?
We have looked, I say we because I find myself just being in Elvada on a regular basis.
You were with them.
I was with her. I led her right to it. She's up throwing this thing in the ground like this, and I'm thinking, Lord, help. But she did raise the dead. She raised that headstone right out of there, and of all the headstones we found, it says Amarillo Jeffery.
Is the headstone still there?
The headstone is still there. They put that headstone right back down in the ground, face down, so that as the cattle and equipment go around, it wouldn't break it. But the lady that owns that land, she said it would be just fine to put up a marker there and list whoever we knew was buried there. But the only way they knew that she was buried there was due to the Jesse James family that lives over in Carroll County, Arkansas, that sent information as to why, when Jesse James was here, they knew certain things they had done here in the White River Valley, and they knew that he had went concern about Annie Rachel Jeffery. I don't know who she is. You know, you get old and you lose who people are. But she's buried in Miles' cemetery at Livingston Creek. You know, my grandson Miles, he's got this cemetery that wasn't too far from his house. And Elvada and Rosemary, leave it to them, and that Freda woman, they got out there cleaning up that cemetery with, of all people, one of William Henderson's descendants. And they lifted all those headstones, some of them, let's see, whose docks was the biggest, wasn't it?
Jerome and Dr. Robert.
Dr. Robert Jeffries, Lord, he might have trying to reach heaven. But they got out there digging around, and Elvada and Rosemary found Annie Rachel Jeffries, and she was...
Noel found it.
Noel found it? Did you find it, Noel? Okay, they found it. That crew of Jeffries got in there and found it. But we don't know who she is. We do not know who she is. I don't, she says, when you talk to the dead, you know, they'll tell you things, and she don't belong to nobody in that cemetery, best we can tell. She's white, she's not Indian, she's not black. She says her mom was buried next to her. She's a young woman, not younger than 20.
Well, thank you, Jane. Any other questions?
I have a
We need to
question.
move on.
Caroline,
Okay.
I heard that you have a little sister named Isaac. Well, is this true? Why is there a girl? Why is there a girl in the Jeffery family named Isaac?
Well, the day my daddy was killed, it was shortly after that mom found out that she was expecting another baby.
She was pregnant when your daddy was killed?
She decided right then and there, it didn't matter if it was a little boy or if it was a little girl, that child's name was going to be Isaac. And that's how I got a sister named Isaac, and she's very sweet.
Thank you, Carol. Let me tell you who these people really are. This is my baby brother from Arizona, Hubert Hanks. We call him Herbie. Lisa Jeffery, the cosmopolite from Miami, Florida. Lisa is president of the Jeffery Historical Society. She's a very accomplished woman. She was a captain in the Air Force. She speaks French. She went to the University of Paris. She has an MBA from the University of Monaco. And I could go on and on and on, but I tell you these things because she would never let on. But she's the Jeffery International star. Ed Jeffery is a businessman in Melbourne, yes.
Would you tell who they descend from? What family, what part of the family?
Pardon me?
Would you tell who everybody descends from, what part of the family?
Well, they can tell us. Y'all,
Okay, yeah.
you from Jefhoiada? I mean, you are Jefhoiada.
Well,
From James.
yes.
James was your father, right?
No, he's saying
In real life.
In real life.
Oh, in real life?
Yeah.
Oh, in real life, that might be a little easier, I don't know. How far back am I gonna go? Okay, my mother
Civil War time.
was Gladys Elvada Jeffery. And my father was Ray Hubert Hanks.
Miles Jeffery.
My mother's father was Miles Jeffery, married to Dora Dixon. That's on the mother's side. On the father's side, his father was Roland Hanks, which I only have one memory of him. He wasn't very good.
Tell it.
And
Tell us your memory.
his no, and he was married to Jeffery, which Jeffery? Oh, that's right.
Huldah Jane.
Huldah Jane Jeffery. And that's, you're pushing me if I go beyond that.
And I have been helping everybody practice this line. I'm Lisa Jeffery, daughter of James Darrell Jeffery, who's the son of Thomas Edwin Jeffery and Louisa Curtis, who's the son of Thomas Mason Jeffery and Susan Ada Wiles, who's the son of Jefhoiada B. Jeffery and Nancy Lawrence, who's the son of Daniel Mason Jeffery and another Nancy. Anyway, I'm the Daniel Mason line, who's the son of Jefhoiada, who's the son of James and Jane.
Okay. The question here is to which direction to go. I think I'll work backwards. My dad was Clarence, and if any of you knew him, might have known him as Bun or Bunny. His dad was Lawrence Earl. His dad was Edwin. His dad was Ambrose. Ambrose's dad was Miles. Miles was the son of Jehoiada.
Very good.
Great.
Now, if I were a horse, I'd be double registered. Because on my grandmother Jeffrey, Hester, was a Mayfield. She is descended from Young Jesse line.
So you're your own fourth cousin.
Pretty much, yeah. Pretty
As
much.
long as you're not your own grandpa, that's fine.
The creek split a pretty good ways and then come back again.
And I have the same line, except my mother was Pauline Jeffery Russell, Earl Jeffrey, and then on back, just like his, on both sides.
And me, I'm
Freda is
I'm
an
a woman of
honorary
mystery.
Jeffery.
I have no Jeffrey roots. I just probably know more about the extended Jeffrey family than most people in this room. Because I write pre-Civil War history of the White River Valley, and when Jefhoiada got here in 1816, that limits who you write about. But everyone in this room, if you don't know it, you can be an Arkansas pioneer. I'm still trying to get some applications and get them out to people. It's only $5 a year. You had to be here prior to or by the 1850 census. And believe it or not, that's not a lot of people. It was about 4,000 people in the state of Arkansas prior to 1850. And that is also where we get the people, anybody who came after 1850s from off. That's actually a legal definition. So when we tell somebody that you're off, that's a real definition. You're off 20 miles from your residence. It was in these when we applied for passports from France to travel in these territories, you had to, if you were traveling off a distance more than 20 miles from your primary residence, you had to have a passport from France up until 1803. So it is a legal term, and it is continued by the Arkansas pioneers, except they say anybody wasn't in Arkansas prior to 1850s from off. And you're lying.
I want to be sure now.
You're such a good brother-in-law.
My name is James Jeffery. I'm the son of Carl Jeffery, who was the son of Daniel Mason Jr., who was the son of Daniel Mason Sr., who was the son of Jeffery and James back. But my mother was Mabel Robertson, and her father was the Reverend David Russell Roberts, who served as pastor of this church from 1916 to 1946.
Wow.
And he was also involved in the Arkansas Senate had him a horse, and he rode the horse to Guyenne, all about, I think about 6 churches it was at.
There's a little side conversation going on over here.
Yeah, we're trying to listen to them.
Hey,
Listen to
you
them.
hush them. You hush them people over
Why
there.
is it that we don't have any information about you?
Well, there were a number of Masons in Virginia and the Old Dominion, and some of the Masons fought for the British, and some of the Masons fought for the colonists. And those that fought for the British are the ones that lived up here in the Ozarks. They were not Americans. And the Ozark culture is pretty much founded on ex-British patriots who did not want to go back to England. And so if you took the side of Great Britain, whether you were here or not, you pretty much got thrown out of your family. Didn't matter who you were.
So you married it to
I married into Jeffreys, who were second generation British. They were here, but they were beneath me, and the combination of things.
But were you here when you married him or there?
Yes, we were in the Old Dominion.
So that means your family was expatriates, sort of came here.
Some of them were.
Mama,
So you were one of
Go
them.
ahead.
could I say something?
Yes.
I didn't go very far, just my grandparents, but Dale can help me. I know that on my father's side, I can trace back to either Jefhoiada or his brother, Daniel. And then on my mother's side, we trace back to one of the other, Jefhoiada or brother Daniel. I don't know which is which. But I can't go on.
We
Both
have
got both Daniel-
we
both
have the
Daniel
ships
and-
laden where the Jeffreys came here, right around the time of the American Revolution. Basically, they came to fight, and as best I can tell, and Dale can correct me if I'm wrong, but they came to fight for the British. But as soon as you got here, if you'd signed an oath of allegiance to the Americans, you got to stay. And they had nothing to go home to, because if you were the, say there were 10 children, and you were the oldest, you got all the land. Nope, them other 9 didn't get squamped. So unless you were the oldest child, you had nothing to go home to. So both the Germans, the Prussians, there was a number of people who came here to fight for the British that very quickly started fighting for the Americans and to become landowners, because it was not possible in Europe. It was not possible in Europe. And so the Ozarks has the highest concentration of British descendants anywhere outside of Great Britain in the world. Wales, Scotland, Ireland, Great Britain, the highest concentration is in the Ozarks of Arkansas and Missouri.
How old were you when you got married?
I was 10 years younger than he was, that's all we need to say.
I have a story to tell about how the Jeffery family came to America. My granddad, Earl Jeffery, told us the story that had been handed down to him through the generations, and Eloise was there, that old James of Virginia, his father,
James.
was lived on a high cliff in England, lived in a big rock, fancy house. He was a lord or a judge. He did not like the way the government was going. He did not like the religious persecution that was going on there. And it was not going to be easy for him to get his son and his boys out of England. So he managed to buy passage for them on the ship. And he let his son, James of Virginia, and the boys down over the side of this cliff into a small boat. And they were taken out to the larger ship and brought to America. And we were told that when they came to America, they brought silver, papers, and a large clock that Robert has. And that's how they came to America.
And that is consistent with what I have found, that there were 3 brothers that came. Jesse, Jefhoiada, and James came from England, and they worked as stewards, cabin boys, whatever, on the ship to come, but in the passage, basically proclaimed themselves as British in order not to be thrown overboard. Survival.
Would you explain about Charles Collars, what you told me a while ago?
Oh, yes, I'll stand up. Please stand up. There's a picture, you all may have seen it, of Mary Balcock Jeffrey. Who was she married to? Balcock. Who was she married to? There's a picture.
She's married to my son. She's married to Daniel.
Daniel.
They took me in after James threw me out.
Okay, Daniel. So it's an old picture. She has a collar on just like this. And I heard that Jane Mason, get together, that Jane Mason had a collar like this too. And so it must have been the ladies under Jane Mason, it must have started it because it's extremely, fashionable for the backwoods of Arkansas, I think. So it seems that the Jeffery ladies of the 1800s wore these collars. So I posted this picture on my Facebook page, and a friend of mine who's a crochet artist, very serious, she said, my crochet circles have never seen an actual photograph of 1850s patterns of the little collars they wore. And so she studied it, blew it up and sent it to her crochet groups. They had also never seen the actual pattern. Before they were guessing, so it went viral on the crochet sites that now we have an actual pattern that the women of the 1800s wore. And she made these for me. I said, can you make duplicates of that exact pattern that Mary Balcock Jeffrey wore that we women can wear at the family reunion? And so she carefully crocheted each one and sent it to us.
Thank you.
And of course, I have a theory on that. The story that's been in the Jeffery family is that Jane came from a wealthy family in Virginia. I believe this is probably a pattern that she brought with her, or possibly even, collars like this she brought with her. But it was a fashion of the time.
Mm-hmm. Why did you leave your husband?
Put this one around with it.
Why did
Well,
she
it was a combination of things, and it goes right back to the Hendersons. Because, you see, in Tennessee, Kentucky, the Hendersons thought they owned everything. Well, in a sense, they did. Judge Henderson, he hired Daniel Boone to cut the Wilderness Trail through Tennessee and Kentucky over here to the Mississippi River, and then after that, it was just free-for-all. Well, right before the Civil War, right before the American Revolution, he lost all of his land. But he had promised all this land to various people, including Daniel Boone, who moved on to Missouri and brought William with him and a bunch of other people. Well, what happened was we were working for them, and when he lost all of his land, and so, he paid off in trinkets and beads and, whatever he could, paid the Indians for the land and did all kinds of stuff. Well, he didn't pay up. So we moved on to land that actually belonged to Judge Henderson. The U.S. Supreme Court gave him that land. And so when William and Jesse got into it over the land, we had papers that said it was ours, and they had papers that said it was theirs. And, over time the story changes. Now, the Hendersons will tell you that that he just cold-cocked him and killed him, But there was a bit of a scuffle, and it might have even been an accident, we're not sure. And Lord, if you read the testimony that they had down in Little Rock, thankfully Jess was there, and he got to tell me the real version of what happened. But we got evicted from our property. We had to leave. The Arkansas courts said it belonged to the Hendersons. So we had to leave our land, and so that's when we moved over here, and we were actually in Mount Olive at that time with the kids. Well, I started treating the Indians across the river, and you make a little money, you get a little hide, you get this. Well, Jefhoiada, you talk about a man that had his fingers in every pie. Well, if I come dragging in some furs, he could trade them and give me some money. I could feed the kids, I could take care of stuff, and James was a bit of a rounder, a little bit more than Jess in some ways. But it just kept on, and I'm just not a woman that's going to be told what I can do. And so, we got into this argument, and he had cost us our house, he had cost us our land, and Jefhoiada had been trying to, cost Jefhoiada his friendship with Ambrose Sevier, and all the governor, the president that was going to come up governor later, and all this stuff, he was just constantly taking down the things that Jefhoiada was trying to do, and that the other children were trying to do. Daniel was a reverend. He established the Gaylor Church and the Gaylor Cemetery, what's now known as Gaylor. And we have some good people in our family, but James, he and I didn't see eye to eye all the time. I love that man. Doesn't mean just because you love him, don't mean you have to like him. And it's a big stormy night, and I went across the river, and he told me when I got back that, kind of like when men and women set the things outside and set them on fire. Well, he knew better than to set them on fire. Well, I went over to Daniel and Mary's house, and I stayed with Daniel and Mary for another 10 years.
Well, thank you, Jane.
Let me give the family version. The family version is that Jane was in her 50th year, and James did not like her to go out alone, because sometimes she would go for 50 miles on horseback to doctor. And he asked her not to go out anymore because there were Indians and bushwhackers and bad people in the country at the time, and she promised him that she wouldn't. And then one night there was 2 Indian women came from across the river, and one of them's daughter was having a baby, and she was in distress, which possibly wasn't very used back then, but she was in trouble. She was the mother and the baby.
We need to yeah.
One final thing I want to say. It's my understanding that Jefhoiada first knew about this area because of the survey that was done. He was a major contributor in the survey. He surveyed all through this area. He was a leader, I suppose. He ran the transit, and another fellow took all of his documentation that he would say, 12 degrees west or whatever, 10 degrees north. He would write this all down. I was working at the print shop at the Folk Center, and this guy came in the print shop and he said, I'm looking for a descendant of Jeffery Jeffery. And I said, well, yeah, I am. And he said, well, I have the transit and the ledger in my car that Jefhoiada is named all through it and everything in my ancestor, and he never even said who his ancestor was. I said, if you'll hang on 10 minutes, I'll be right with you. Because I have a gang of people in my shop. I looked around and he's gone. I have no idea who he is or what he gone. If I could see him right now, joking. But can't.
Another thing is Denny Elrod with the Exploring Izzard County crew. They something that surveyors use, and they're pretty sure it's Jehoiada's. I don't know exactly.
Transit.
Compass.
I don't know what, compass, that's it, it's the compass, it's the compass, it sits at the top. They have found what they believe is Jehoiada's, and I don't ask me where they
Well, now
found it,
this
where they
guy-
got it, I ain't getting into that.
this guy
I can
has-
tell. Wait,
Did we see that?
Warren has it, and he's a descendant of the Landers family.
Did we see
And Mary
that?
Jeffrey married Baxter Landers, that's how
they
we
think
came
about it.
into the Landers family.
Is the ledger with it? This guy had both.
I can't honestly answer that.
Get on and explore in Israel County and get Denny Elrod.
This guy has the transit and the ledger both together, and the ledger said, it declared, it was Jehoiada and his ancestor.
He had it in the house last night, and I
Yeah,
thought.
he
that-
left before I got there.
Huh?
But he left before we got there.
Okay. We need to move on. Just briefly, I would like for us to recognize and remember Jehoiada Quincy Jeffery, the JQJ that's on everybody's Jeffery certificate. It will be 149 years tomorrow at noon that he was killed in the Battle of Atlanta. 6 months before Jehoiada Quincy was killed, his older brother Isaac was killed in Mount Olive on January the 25th, 1864. So it was almost 6 months to the day after Isaac was murdered by federal soldiers out of Batesville. There wasn't any combat loss. They just shot him. He was shucking corn near his house.
The troops had been at the Battle of Lunenburg and came down to Silvermore, or came down to Mount Olive, is that not correct?
Yeah.
And then they burned part of Mount Olive, killed Isaac, crossed the river. The guys here got together and attacked them across from this side of the river. You find all kinds of stuff in the fields over there.
If you're from the East Coast, you only think of the Civil War being fought on those few states through there.
More battles.
You don't ever think of them
Yeah.
coming across the
More
Mississippi.
battles were fought in the state of Missouri than any other states in the South. It's just they were very small.
The Battle of
The only thing
Helena,
I can see about that is those movies that come
Caroline.
about rednecks that came
Battle of
looking for
Helena.
the desserts.
the Battle of Helena, Arkansas was a huge battle.
We'd like to hear a few words from Caroline, the descendant of Isaac. Could you tell us a little bit?
Oh, I can tell you the story.
Tell us about the reigning
And this will be our memorial service.
Oh, okay.
Oh, all right. Let's see. Before I tell you this story, I'm going to let you know, I grew up hearing this story. There are many other stories about Isaac, his wife, my grandmother Caroline. And it was always a very dramatic story for me, and I would get to a certain part in the story that would trigger a lot of emotions, and I would run from the room. Because I couldn't understand why anybody would want to kill my granddad. So this is how my grandmother, this is Judy's mother, this is how my grandmother would tell the story. She would say it was in the year 1864. Your grandfather, Isaac, in the service of the Southern Army, was home on furlough. And that morning in January, as was customary in those days, he had gotten up and he went and he hid the horses in the woods. And then he took his little daughter Caroline to town, and he bought for her a small crockery pitcher. When they came back to town, he was seen coming back to the house, little Caroline riding in his lap. palm was a small crockery pitcher. She had her wee little fingers grasped around the handle of the pitcher. So they came back, and they proceeded to move out to the barn to shut the door. The door was open. Now, if you think that all the men, the able-bodied men and boys were all off at the war, and it was January, so you don't know, there's a big cornfield there, and you don't know if there was corn still broken, unharvested in that field, or if it had been harvested. But anyway, he was shoving corn in the barn. Well, something that you may or may not know, when he was on his way home from wherever it was that he was at, when he was coming home for his furlough, and I forgot to put this in, he had stopped because there was a band of bushwhackers in the road, and they were taking another man's life, and he intervened. And they said to him, "We'll get you next, Jeffrey." So they knew who he was. Little Caroline was heard screaming in the barn. Men were coming. There's men on horses. And Isaac knew who they were and what they were about. And he ran out of that barn. He crossed the field where they finally cornered him on Powell Creek, stood him up next to a tree, and they shot him twice. And he fell there in his creek. The first person to his side was a little boy about 10 or 12 years old named Augustus, who was followed by Mary and Grandma's helper. And they put him in the car, and they brought him back here to Elijah Jeffrey's house along the railroad tracks. And on the back porch is where they laid him. And blood from his wound strained into the wood timbers of the porch. And he's buried right down here in this cemetery in Flat Rocks along the river. Those boards, rather than replace them or scrub them, they pulled the boards up and they flipped them over. And my father would tell Grandma would tell Grandma Judy that you could still see the blood stains under those boards, but they disappeared for a while ago. They were removed from the house. Just those boards at first, and then of course the rest of the place. That's the story of Isaac.
Thank you for that. Lisa has a form and some certificates to hand out. So Lisa, it's all yours.
Okay. This is not my poem. It comes from Curran Jeffery in California. Last year, I asked Curran to write a poem for us, and now I call Curran the Poet Laureate of the Jeffery Historical Society. So he sent this to me. Hello, Lisa. Here is a poem to read this summer in Mount Olive. I wish I could be there. You may certainly post it on Facebook, and I would love to see it after the reunion. This is about my grandfather, Augustus Curran Jeffery, Jr. He was born at Mount Olive, the son of the first A.C. Jeffery, who built the house there, the house that we're going to. This is called The Coffee Maker by Curran Jeffery. The first thing I do in the morning is make coffee, just like my mother did before me, and my grandfather before her. Well, not just like. I remember my grandfather making coffee. It wasn't anything like my filter drip method, with water heated in the microwave. And I must confess, the last few years of her life, my mom used Folgers Instant coffee crystals. Grandpa would rise before dawn and and build a fire in the wood-burning stove. That was so much fun to watch, with the flames from the kindling wood and old newspaper leaping through the hole in the top of the stove. Before he put the black iron lid down in its place. And then he'd fill the coffee pot with water from the hand pump. Fill the cup of the percolator with coffee and put in place the old dented pot and put the whole contraption in place. On the coal black stove, as soon as the water started to boil, you could see the brewing coffee bubbling up in the little glass tub. And it made the most wonderful, boiling, bubbling sound. That was like morning music, that coffee. It was almost ready. Grandpa waited till the coffee was good and dark. This was his energy drink before he went out to feed the horses, slop the hogs, and milk the cows by hand, as he did every morning. No vacations, no holidays, no sick days, no days off.
You have the certificates?
Yes.
Some of you Jeffery Historical Society certificates that offer proof to whoever might challenge you that you are a blue-blooded Archie, meaning that you're the first families of Arkansas, and some may be here, some may not.
Uh-oh, someone has stolen the certificate.
It's me.
Freda stole them.
And the ketchup. And the ketchup.
And the ketchup. And the ketchup.
Well, it wasn't me.
Okay. Was there a certain one that you should hand out?
No, go ahead. She's not here, I can take it.
Okay.
If
what
they're not
about-
here, then you know the person, you could get the certificate to them, then that would be.
Okay, yeah, pick it up if you know the person. Okay, Fern Jeffery McMahon Moody.
She's not here, not here.
Okay. Stanley J.J. Jeffery.
Anybody knows?
Charles Edwin Watt. Edward Clarence Jeffery. Deborah Sue Jeffrey Moody. Lynn Jeffrey Pollock. She's not here.
She is at Jesse's old place.
Right, okay. Jerry Douglas Pollock. Jacob Charles Jeffrey. Matthew Edward Jeffrey.
Matthew Edward Jeffery.
Oh, okay. Landon Cole Gross. Jessica Diane Jeffrey Gross. Tommy Brown.
I'll take it.
Kaylin Lance Gross. Uh-oh, this one's spelled wrong.
This is a special one from Charles Boyce Jeffrey, who lives in Batesville. We call him Boyce. He's our first cousin. And I'll just read you the second paragraph here. Whereas, and so on and so on and so forth. Therefore, the Board of the Jeffery Historical Society hereby affirms that despite the way he spells his name wrong, Charles Boyce Jeffrey is hereby confirmed a blue-blooded Archie. He spells his name R-E-Y. and he insists that that's the way that it should be spelled. He's the only one I know in the Jeffery family that just wants to go R-E-Y to the E-R.
Well, he ain't a real Jeffery.
Yeah,
He
right.
must have been adopted or something.
But he gets a certificate in it despite the fact that he can't spell right.
Okay, John Harvey Watt the third. Yeah. No. John Harvey Watt Jr. Michael Sean Jeffrey. Marcia Leanne Jeffrey Bruce. Linda Maureen Jeffrey.
Just stay right here.
Sandy Grice.
Yeah.
You guys sure are hogging up a lot of these certificates.
They got a wall they want to do.
Janie Hudson. Get it to Janie. Robert Edward Watt.
Right there.
Brian Lee Jeffrey. John Harvey Watt, Sr. Samantha Lynn Watt. Deborah Watt.
He's got a wall he wants to do too.
Charles David Watt. No, you're hogging up all the rest. If you were here and you didn't get a certificate, you need one. So I'm on the folder of these certificates, write your name. Please don't get one.
I'm your aunt, you sure did.
No, I sent him to jail.
Well, thank you, everyone. Let's have one more round of applause for the panel. Everyone is invited to the Old Jesse Jeffery house. All you do is go out and take that road. It goes up, and go as far as you can go.